Apres Moi Le Deluge is the third oldest mod in the workshop, and the first full conversion alternate history mod ever made for Hearts of Iron 4. In my LoreGrave videos, I usually cover mods that I was already familiar with, but this Hoiform mod is so ancient and beloved that it feels less like reviewing a mod and more like raiding a catacomb. Regardless of how difficult this may be, I took on the challenge. But as I was working on this, I found that this scenario might actually be better as a Victoria 3 mod rather than a Hearts of Iron 4 mod. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Before that, we need to define what Apres Moi Le Deluge even is. This mod is about a Napoleonic Empire surviving until World War II. The lore is very loosely defined, especially compared to others like Kaiserreich. This gave the developer the flexibility to have things like a Hamiltonian Kingdom of America, Orleanist Louisiana, and a large Kingdom of Poland. However, having too fluid of an alternate history can be a detriment to its expansion, and in my experience, finding a single point of divergence and moving forward from there can lead to far more engaging and compelling conflict. The easiest way to have a Napoleonic victory is to have them prevent the reason why they collapsed in the first place, the foundation of the Duchy of Warsaw. After the War of the Fourth Coalition, Napoleon took regions that Prussia and Austria had partitioned out of Poland to create a satellite state there. This directly antagonized Russia, as they feared Napoleon's ambitions to use the Duchy of Warsaw as a staging ground for a future Russian invasion if they ever stepped out of line. Calling their bluff, Russia resumed trade with Britain, France invaded, lost their elite troops to scorched earth tactics, had their forced allies of Austria and Prussia betray them all before Napoleon lost everything. But while the easiest solution may be to avoid the Duchy of Warsaw's foundation, having a strong Poland that seeks to contest the new order is a core part of what makes this mod so iconic. So what could possibly cause Napoleon to defeat Russia? While it may be a little implausible, I have an idea, and it involves a point of divergence that you may not expect. George Washington dying before the United States Constitutional Convention. A little while ago, I was invited by Possible History to create a timeline where the US Constitutional Convention had failed. I had the idea that instead of the states remaining separate forever, Alexander Hamilton and his ideology would gain more ground, eventually leading him to unite the United States under a far more autocratic regime after suppressing a Southern rebellion. But how would this point of divergence affect the Napoleonic Wars? Well, I believe that under Hamilton's leadership, the War of 1812 of this timeline would be a far closer fight. The War of 1812 is a controversial one. For Canadians, it was the beginning of our national identity. For the Americans, it's a war they didn't win but definitely didn't lose. One thing is certain though, the president claimed that annexing Canada would be as simple as marching. In reality, it was a slog that ended with the White House in flames. But if Hamilton was Anglophilic, would there even be a War of 1812 in the first place? Despite his admiration of Britain, his position of leader of the United States would force him to take action against Britain in order to protect its sovereignty. The rise of Napoleon and his sale of Louisiana to the United States would cause Hamilton and Napoleon to begin establishing a trade connection. While this would upset Britain, Hamilton's admiration of British institutions did not mean that he would allow for America to become a client state. By diversifying their trading partners, the United States would develop their economy and ensure that their development was not dependent on the British alone. Just like our timeline, mutual economic embargoes would lead to American trade with Europe being intercepted by a British blockade, increasing tensions and ultimately leading to a war similar in timing and reasoning as the War of 1812 of our history. But the question is, would a Hamiltonian America perform better in this war than our history? While this would be a good opportunity for us to continue down the path of plausibility, this may be the time where we begin serving our core, using this stronger USA to help justify the core of this mod, a Napoleonic victory scenario. In our timeline, Britain was able to finance anti-French movements, supporting Russia and Spain in its resistance, encouraging defectors away from Napoleon's world order, ultimately leading to Napoleon's defeat. While this may not be enough on its own, having a far more organized American military may lead to the British economic system being strained enough to not be a reliable bankroll for anti-Napoleonic forces. So in order to ensure the Napoleonic victory scenario that we need, we'll have this War of 1812 consume too much British resources for them to afford financing the Iberian and Russian guerrilla wars against France. Russia would then concede defeat to France, allowing for the Duchy of Warsaw to become the Kingdom of Poland-Lithuania once more. by restoring their eastern borders, extending the continental system to a defensible position, and deterring any further incursions into Napoleon's Europe. All this would appear to allow for Napoleon to then turn around and expand further. The Russian war would have depleted Napoleon of his strongest, most elite soldiers, and even without extensive British bankrolling, the insurrections in Spain would continue to be an issue for Napoleon to manage. Thus, by 1815, Europe would be consolidated under Napoleon's rule. But what would be happening in America? While we've detailed how a Hamiltonian USA may be more capable of waging war against the British, having the USA completely defeat the British would not lend very well to our scenario. Every moment the British spend attempting to preserve their North American colonies is a moment where they're less capable of financing Napoleon's demise. And besides, even if the American army was stronger, it still would have been a former colony fighting the economic hegemon of the 19th century. So you can make arguments for any outcome here. If we wanted to go closer to something that would resemble the outcome that Apres Moi Le Deluge had, we could have the British beating the Americans and granting Louisiana to the exiled French dynasty afterwards. This could then lead to Hamiltonian America having a Cope-style transition to full monarchy, ultimately resulting in an outcome similar to AMLD. However, the American setup in AMLD is one of my least favorite aspects of the scenario. Even if America became a monarchy, there would still be many individuals seeking to settle westward. With the already sparse French population of Louisiana, the land bordering America would be full of American settlers, who would then revolt against Louisiana like Texas had against Mexico. So, in my opinion, the Kingdom of Louisiana and America existing as separate states for over 100 years without any territorial exchanges is extremely implausible. This is why I lean towards having a Hamiltonian America succeed in the War of 1812. By having a big America this early on, we would have a lot of interesting dynamics that could manifest by 1936. The least of which being a Hamiltonian president that proclaims himself emperor, causing a civil war between communists, democrats, monarchists, and so on. However, a brilliant solution was proposed by Viper 2090 that would bridge the gap between both my and the original timeline while keeping the Kingdom of Louisiana intact. In this proposed timeline, the British eventually defeat America, take some New Englandic concessions, and establish a Kingdom of Louisiana. The Hamiltonians then cope by going full monarch, but after a strategic royal marriage, the American and Louisiana kingdoms would be ruled by the same monarch. This strange union would give a monarchist America its pre-Western frontier again, allowing for further expansion while preserving the Kingdom of Louisiana. This union would allow for a cultural melting pot, but separate parliaments would ensure regional cultural protection laws to allow for the French populations of Louisiana to not be subsumed by the Anglo-American settlers. This would allow for a Louisianan identity and borders to be internationally recognized, which will then allow for us to have Louisiana separate either by internal or external forces. It could be that the Americans are defeated in the First World War, and Louisiana is made separate, like Austria and Hungary were made separate, or a civil war following a succession crisis causes a rival Louisianan claimant to fight against the established Colombian-Louisianan Union. Either way, this is a very brilliant solution for our scenario, so we'll have this timeline of events be our canon for America. Thanks again to Viper 2090 for your suggestion. Whenever I do LoreGraves, I do streams like this in order to get people's feedback and also not be so lonely when I'm making the maps. And this is a great example of this sort of feedback being pivotal for the development of the LoreGrave. So I hope that you tune in for our next stream, hopefully after this video. Regardless of outcome, I believe that this lore would be a great way to set up the 1936 scenario. But this is where I started to see that there'd be a lot more potential turning this into a Victoria 3 mod. As I continuously attempted to iron out the next 100 years of European history, I kept thinking about how I'd want to play this scenario in Victoria 3, since there's so many natural and compelling conflicts that would take place here. So as we reach 1836, keep in mind that this lore isn't just a bridge that we need to cross to reach Hoi 4, but could potentially be the main feature as gameplay in a Victoria 3 mod. By 1836, Napoleon's son, Napoleon II, would have been in power, ascending to the throne after his father's death without contest or resistance from other European powers. Thankfully, to his position of influence, he would be very unlikely to suffer the same death as he had in our history. But while he would avoid suffering a pneumonia, he would die at the hands of revolutionaries. Despite it all, France would still be sitting on a volcano. Even without the tumultuous French political situation following Napoleon's defeat in the 6th and 7th coalitions, the rhetoric of forcing revolutionary ideals while embodying an absolute monarchy, the exact institution the revolution had sought to destroy, would cause French radicals to either double down on liberalism or embrace new ideologies such as anarchism or socialism, triggering a new political reality for Europe. The springtime of nations in our timeline saw attempts for liberal Germans to unite into one state, Hungary attempting to become independent, and the foundation of the Second French Republic. The inciting incident of our springtime of nations could be many things, but the best way to ensure the weakness of the Napoleonic order would be an assassination of Napoleon II. This violent death of Napoleon's son would be a perfect opportunity for anti-Napoleonic movements to rise up. Spain, the Republic Kingdom of Portugal, Italy, Prussia, and the Rhenish Confederation would all pounce on this opportunity, with the latter two uniting together to attempt to form a German nation. In our history, when German liberals took over Frankfurt, they attempted to unify Germany by crowning a Kaiser. When the crown was offered to Prussia, the king refused to accept a crown from the gutter. However, the Confederation of the Rhine would comprise of bishoprics, duchies, and kingdoms. This crown would not be one from the gutter. It would be from the direct descendants of the electorate of the Holy Roman Empire. This opportunity to unite Germany would be seized by Prussia, as they would declare war on France to liberate their kin in the Rhineland. Germany would be one of many revolutions that would be standing against France, but it would be the most dangerous. If France were to attempt to eliminate all of these resistance movements at the same time, Napoleon's empire would crumble. Therefore, France would need to make deals with their other opponents in an attempt to preserve their state. Portugal's transition would be very straightforward. The client kingdom with an illegitimate king would simply abdicate in favor of the Portuguese government in exile. In our timeline, this would lead to the separation of the Brazilian Empire from the Portuguese kingdom. But in this timeline, the possibility of the Portuguese Empire remaining united is possible. Instead of seeing Brazil as a colony, or the Brazilian Empire as colonizing Portugal, the Brazilian Empire and Portuguese kingdoms would both have separate parliaments while recognizing the same king. A similar arrangement to the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the British Dominion system. This union would set the precedent for other strong monarchical players in the Americas, and combined with Portuguese colonies, would be the founding of a new great power of the world. They would be bordered by the Kingdom of Spain, which could either still be under a Napoleonic dynasty, but in most likelihood had transitioned to the state of a forced ally. Regardless of status, the Franco-Spanish borders would be very interesting. The reason why Napoleon had annexed Catalonia was to eventually emulate the Iberian frontier of the Frankish Empire for national security purposes, and of course, an extra mark of prestige. It's possible that the Spanish Bourbons would claim all their former territories and march against Napoleon. But it's also possible that Napoleon III accepts a withdrawal back to the former French-Spanish boundary in exchange for ensuring that they don't support the Germans. Or if we went with a Napoleonic dynasty in Spain, we could have them leaving and having a Bourbon restoration. However, in the case of a Bourbon monarchy still existing, I think that because Spain was relatively weak and the defensive positions that France could hold in this region would be so strong that Spain would not march against France. I want to take a step back to acknowledge how implausible this scenario is becoming. Despite my best efforts, too many things need to continue to go right for France to reach 1936 without losing their empire. By having the French continue to hold their Iberian territories, we will ensure Spanish entry into a future World War I, while also solidifying France's new borders. And if Spain were to get involved in the anti-Napoleonic revolutions, it's very possible that France would not be able to resist the encroachment of their greatest adversaries. It's for this reason that we should ensure that Italy unifies without conflict. France would ensure that the peninsula unifies under a nascent Italian movement. There's a lot of different paths we could go for Italy history-wise, but in order to keep the scenario moving, I'm not going to specify the form of government of Italy. They, at the very least, would control the mainland peninsula, sans Piedmont, and would guarantee non-aggression as a condition for Napoleon's recognition of their state, allowing for the French to focus on their greatest threat geopolitically, Germany. But would they be able to defeat them? How would they secure allies against the German threat? In our timeline, Austria faced a Hungarian revolution. The revolt was so significant that Austria had to rely on Russian intervention to prevent the spreading of liberal ideals into their own state. However, in this timeline, things are far different. Austria would have lost Tyrol, Istria, and Dalmatia to indirect or direct French annexations, and would also face significant border tensions between themselves and the French satellite state of the PLC. While the PLC would certainly like to reverse the partitions, they would face significant pressure between themselves and the Russian Empire, preventing them from taking direct action against the Habsburgs. Despite their Polish satellite state being the bulwark of their empire, the French would not be able to support the Polish without guaranteeing Austrian alignment and stability through their Adriatic ports, making Habsburg alignment with France a requirement to ensure our 1936 scenario. While the matter of Hungarian nationhood may be a sore spot, for now, the Habsburgs would not be keen to join the Hohenzollern, Greater Germany. In order to stabilize their state, Napoleonic France would concede their Adriatic exclave back to the Habsburgs in exchange for their assistance putting down the German threat and allowing for French logistics to reach the PLC. But who would be leading France after Napoleon II's death? In order to keep things straightforward and in line with history, we'll have our timelines Napoleon III taking charge rather than any alternate claimant. This would mean that the Kingdom of Netherlands would avoid falling out of the Napoleonic hegemony, as Napoleon III would have been ruling it directly, but they would certainly be facing some sort of anti-French revolt in brotherhood with the Germans. The revolutions of 1848 would cascade to become a war between France, the Habsburgs, and the PLC against the Hohenzollern, Proto-Germany, and Russia. But where's Britain during this whole thing? Well, in our history, in the 1830s, the British would be suffering a proto-socialist movement in the Chartist movement. While in our timeline, this would eventually be resolved through political maneuvers between reformist politicians, a reluctant House of Lords and King, there is significant potential for the movement to go violent alongside the rest of the 1848 revolution. Therefore, in order to justify the 1936 scenario, we'll have the Chartist movement evolving into a revolution. Perhaps this revolt could even be led by Karl Marx himself, given his exile in Britain by this period in our timeline. This revolution would eventually be put down, but would distract the United Kingdom, preventing them from intervening in the European chaos. One thing that would be important to note for plausibility's sake is that the Russians would take territory off the PLC. The fact that the Poles wouldn't suffer outright annexation would have already been a miracle, so the Polish would begrudgingly accept this outcome. Tolerance of this humiliation would be made possible after the collapse of the Austrian Empire and territorial annexations off of Prussia. Following a comprehensive peace treaty, the Habsburgs would withdraw from their non-German territories and instead ascend into a dominant position in a new German confederation. This would be solidified by ensuring the destruction of the Prussian state, with Saxony expanded to its greatest extent, Brandenburg and Royal Prussia being separated by a Polish corridor, and Silesia annexed by Austria. With these territorial acquisitions, the Habsburgs would be content to keep the German Confederation a loose alliance of nobility, rather than a centralized modern state. This would suit Napoleon III just fine, as this was an established geopolitical motivation between the two states. That, and a Habsburg-led German Confederation would not dare contest the natural border of the French state. However, Napoleon III would not be content to simply allow the Habsburgs to dominate the German Confederation. In order to ensure the Napoleonic dynasty still had a say in German matters, they would force the Netherlands to join the German Confederation, while maintaining their title of Dutch king. This would therefore mean that the French emperors would have a vote in the policy of the German Confederation, further weakening unification efforts and maintaining their influence in the region. While it was not as direct as the Confederation of the Rhine before it, the French would maintain influence in Germany. Despite losing influence in territory in Iberia and Italy, they would remain the preeminent power in Europe. However, this peace would not last, eventually resulting in a great war that would define the 1936 scenario. But by now, we've reached a point where it's extremely difficult to proceed from a lore perspective. We have 50 years to go, and this video has already taken too long to make. Typically, scenarios like this, where we have 120 years of alternate history to establish, can make it difficult to make a coherent Hoi 4 scenario. So while I think that the scenario should have been a Victoria 3 mod, there's a Hoi 4 mod called Apres Moi Le Deluge, which is preserving and expanding on the original scenario. So if you want to play this classic, you can do it right now. The links to their Discord and Steam page will be in the description. If you want to see how I would approach this as a Hoi 4 scenario, let your voice be heard by leaving a comment or a like. While I may be busy with other projects, I hope to continue this sometime soon. Thank you for watching, shout out to my channel members, and I hope you have a good day.